The purpose of this lesson is to help you to improve your speaking band score by focusing on the particular parts that they evaluate you on when they look at your speaking skill. So in this video, we're going to focus on the category lexical resource. Lexical resource is basically your ability to use and manipulate vocabulary. And so this is a vocabulary score. Let's take a look at this. Now, the first thing to note, what I'm going to be doing in this lesson is translating the band score descriptors for you, putting them in terms that are maybe a little easier to understand. But you should, if you have not already, look at the band score descriptors for IELTS speaking, and I've linked that below. You can click on that and go see the full description where they give every level of band score and a description of what you need to do to earn that score. What I'm going to be doing in this is taking a view of sort of a lower scoring speaking response, so something in the range of about 5 or 6, and thinking about what a person would need to do to bump up their score up to a higher level, which is what most of you out there are seeking to do. So that's sort of the focus here, trying to make it simple and easy to understand how you can move up from some of the lower levels to the higher level that you're seeking. Okay, so let's start by thinking about the first category they're looking at in this lexical resource part of your score. So the first question that we're looking for is, can you respond to a range of topics with ease? Okay, so there's a lot in those band descriptors about how well you're able to respond to a wide variety of topics. Now, on the low scoring end of things, it sort of summarizes this way. So a person can respond to part 1 questions without much trouble. So usually those part 1 questions are the easier ones, right? Sort of daily life sort of topics. And most people in the middle ranges, 5 or 6, don't have much trouble responding to those questions. But it's when you get to parts 2 and especially part 3 where people in the sort of middle levels, the lower levels, are struggling to find the right vocabulary in order to express the ideas that they want to say. They either don't have the words to say what they want to say, or down at the bottom, they repeat words too much. So they reuse words that maybe don't fit or are not quite as expressive of the ideas that they're trying to say. Okay, so in other words, there's sort of a lack of vocabulary to talk about certain topics, a wide range of topics. At the higher end of things, people don't have this same difficulty. They have enough vocabulary and they can use it when they speak well enough that they're easily able to come up with the right words for parts 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so what are we talking about though when we're thinking about this range of topics? Okay, what does that really mean? Well, the range that we're looking at, the difference between the easier part 1 questions that we get and the more difficult questions that come later in the test really relates to these things you see in the boxes. At the lower level, we have high frequency topics. So these are topics that it's very likely that you've discussed quite frequently, right, in your language classes, but also if you've ever interacted in English, or if you do so regularly, it's very likely that you talk about certain things, right? You talk about your family, your school, where you're from, okay? Very concrete things like the weather, okay? You have lots of experience with that. At the higher end of things, on the opposite side, okay, so the part 3 questions deal with lower frequency topics. So somebody who's truly very fluent and has a lot of vocabulary will be able to talk about those things that are maybe less common, less a part of daily life, or less common topics that one might discuss. Okay, in the middle there, the lower on the sort of easier topics are more factually based. Okay, so what is the weather like outside? Or where did you grow up? Those are facts. On the other side of things, the more complicated things at the other end of the range are more abstract questions, okay? And finally then, easier questions, or the ones that are most likely to be easy to answer for even the middle range students, they only require short responses, okay, and the other kind require longer responses. So the ones that are more difficult, the ones you're likely to find at the end of the speaking test. Okay, so what they're looking for in your vocabulary, in your lexical resource score, is, are you able to answer the kinds of questions that are typical of the right side of this chart here? The low frequency topics, abstract topics, and topics that require a lengthy response. How well do you do with those, and do you have the words to respond to those kinds of questions successfully? As an example, so the easier kind of question, so the part that is not so tough to answer down at the bottom, what was your favorite subject in school and why did you like it? Okay, so an easy question to answer. Most of us have thought about this kind of thing, and we could answer in a sentence or two. On the other side, an example question, do you think parents should be strict or lenient with their children? Aha! This is maybe something you've never talked about, right? Maybe you don't know, or maybe you've only, you don't have a strong opinion about this question in any way. It's an abstract question because there's no one answer, right? It's not factually based. You have to form an opinion. And to do so, it would require you probably a lot more than one sentence to explain what you mean, right? It requires a lengthy response. Okay, so what you need to do as you're thinking about your lexical resource score is to prepare for these more difficult questions. If you're going to get a good score for lexical resource, you have to be able to answer these more difficult types of questions successfully and with appropriate vocabulary. So what that means is you need to be practicing these kinds of questions as much as possible. I've linked below for you a list of questions that are typical for the IELTS, lots of part 1 and part 2 questions there. But focus on, when you do your practice questions for Magoosh and for any other practice questions you're doing, focus on those part 3 questions and really making sure you have the vocabulary to express the ideas you wish to express there. It's very important that you focus on those part 3 questions and that you have the ability to say what it is you need to say there. So the first tip here, the first way to increase your lexical resource score is to practice lots and lots of these more difficult types of questions and to really focus on vocabulary. If you're struggling to answer these questions, making sure that you do the homework, the research you need to do on the vocabulary that you need to express your true opinion. It may take you a while. You may need to stop and slow down. You may need to write out your part 3 responses at first, okay? If you're struggling to answer them, searching for the right words to express the ideas you really want to say. That is one way to boost your score for lexical resource. Okay, another thing to consider for lexical resource, they're looking for whether you have the ability to paraphrase well. Now, we've talked about paraphrasing in many other of your videos here at Magoosh. As you are, I'm sure, very well aware, paraphrasing is a key skill. For low-scoring students who don't do so well with paraphrasing, they would take a question like this at the bottom. Look at the bottom. How do you like to spend your free time? Okay, just a very typical part 1 question that you might get. And a low-scoring student will answer something like this. I like to spend my free time with my friends. Notice how the language in brackets and in red there really doesn't change around the question very much at all. In fact, it uses almost exactly the same words as the interviewer would have said for this question if they posed it to you. Okay, so a lower scoring student didn't really paraphrase well. They may attempt paraphrasing, okay, at the levels 5 or 6, they discussed that, but it's difficult to do, and maybe a lower scoring student doesn't succeed, okay, isn't unable to paraphrase successfully, so doesn't have the words to do so, or doesn't even attempt it, like we see in this case where the language from the question is simply recycled in the response. All right, now a high-scoring student will do something like this. They have the ability to paraphrase, meaning they change around the language from the question and use their own words. So in green there we see, instead of saying, when I have free time, okay, instead of free time, this person says, when I have nothing scheduled. That's a paraphrase of free time. Okay, and then to continue, the high-scoring students say, I usually try to meet. Instead of just repeating, I like to spend, okay, that verb phrase there, they choose a different set of words that still answers the question very directly. This is the kind of thing you should try to do as you're practicing your speaking questions here. Doing the Magoosh practice questions or any others that you're working on, work on paraphrasing. Try not to use the exact same language as you get in your questions. Rephrase the words and use your own words when you respond. That's what can really boost your score for lexical resource. Okay, another question to ask yourself. Can you use idioms and collocations well? Okay, idioms. So, idioms are these things, these phrases that use language that's, the words say one thing, but the meaning is different. Every language has idioms, and English has many of them. And they're looking for that when they're measuring your skill. The higher scoring students can use idioms effectively. Okay, so here's some examples. This is getting out of hand. Okay, that means that things are out of control, right? Out of hand means out of control. Or somebody might say, hang in there. Okay, what does that mean, to hang in there? Well, it has nothing to do with actually hanging. It's encouragement. It means stay strong or keep going, okay? Don't give up is the idea. Okay, those are idioms. There are many idioms in English, and I've linked below some places you can go to learn idioms, all right? Because they are looking for those and your ability to use them. A low-scoring student with idioms uses very few, or if he or she does use some, uses them incorrectly. A high-scoring student will use idioms accurately. So studying these can pay off. You don't need to worry about using them all the time. Not every answer you have in your speaking section needs to include an idiom in order to score well. They're simply seeing if you have enough knowledge of English that you can that some of these idioms appear occasionally in your speech. Okay, so don't go crazy with these, don't overuse them, but it can be a good idea to study idioms. Okay, the second part of this question here. Okay, we've looked at idioms. The second thing is collocations. What are those? Well, collocations are simply combinations of words that commonly go together. Okay, these are just phrases or word combinations that represent the way native speakers usually combine words. So, for example, we say things like heavy rain. When there's a lot of rain outside, we say heavy rain. We don't really say things like big rain. Okay, there's a big rain outside. Big rain, if you say big rain in your interview, you might lose some points for collocation because that shows you're not aware of the standard or the usual phrases that a native speaker would use when talking about a lot of rain, right? So heavy rain or a strong rain could possibly work, but not a big rain. Big rain sounds strange to a native speaker. Okay, so it's not a collocation. Heavy rain is. We say things like make the bed. It could make logical sense to use a different word than make, right? It could be like arrange the bed. Okay, that might work. But we don't say that. Make the bed is the phrase a native speaker uses. To save time, okay, many languages have a similar phrase to save time, but they do use a different verb. I know in some languages it translates as to keep time or to earn time. In English, we say to save time. All right, these are collocations. A low-scoring student makes frequent collocation errors. Okay, so it's noticeable when you use the wrong words to combine with other words in particular phrases. A high-scoring student makes very few of these errors. Okay, so again, I've linked below for you some lists of collocations that are worthwhile to study. It's a really long list, or a list that has all collocations is not really possible. This is a very complex part of learning English, is learning collocations. But it's something to be aware of, and the lists I've provided below are a good place to start and to review to make sure you know some of the more common collocations that are there. Okay, again, they're listening for this, and this is something that can boost your score if you don't make a lot of collocation errors in the speaking test. Okay, to finish out this lesson, some ways to improve, some additional ways to improve your lexical resource score. If possible, interact in English as much as you can. Are there people around you in your town or online that you can find to interact with in English? Those interactions reinforce your vocabulary whenever you have to use your language, use your English. And so that is a tremendous way to use the vocabulary you already know and to learn new vocabulary through communication. Secondly, seek a lot of variety in your practice. We kind of already mentioned this at the beginning of the lesson, but you should be responding to lots and lots of different Part 2 and Part 3 questions. You should be seeking other opportunities as well to think about and to respond to different kinds of topics, okay? Talking about academic topics, personal topics, talking about things, everything from the weather to shopping to the economy, whatever it is that you can find opportunities to talk about, either with someone live or just practicing responses to yourself, it's a good idea. Okay, respond to as many IELTS questions as you can during this time. Again, linked below are sample prompts for you in a PDF we created. If you have textbooks, if you have other places to find speaking prompts, use all you can, and this should be part of your daily practice. Giving speeches. So I think it's a great idea. I know many of you don't have a lot of regular opportunities to use your English. I really love the idea of students I've known who just simply go give speeches in front of your family. Choose some topics, IELTS speaking topics, and give a speech in front of everybody. Your parents will love it. Maybe your brothers and sisters will not. I don't know. But even if it's just to yourself in front of a mirror, giving speeches requires you to use that language. You're going to find places where you have holes in your vocabulary, and that's what we're looking for. We're trying to find those holes so you can study vocabulary to help you express the ideas you want, and giving little speeches regularly is a great way to do that. Okay, as we heard about in the lesson, study lots of idioms and collocations. Resources below for you for that. And I also recommend, of course, I hope you're doing this, keeping a vocabulary journal and going back to it often. Don't just write words down and then put your vocabulary journal away and never look at those words again. You need to be going back to your vocabulary journal at least a couple times a week and reviewing words that you've found through your reading, through your studies, whatever it is, whatever words are in your journal, go back to that journal often to reinforce your knowledge. Okay, the last point here, practice paraphrasing. So we saw some paraphrasing examples there. Whenever you are responding to IELTS questions, think about your paraphrasing, especially in that first sentence you respond with after you've received the question. That first one is the place where students often slip up and cannot think of words to use as paraphrases to the question that they were just asked. It is hard to do, but the more you practice paraphrasing, the more you get in the habit of trying to find your own words when you respond to questions. Okay, so this is our lesson on how to improve your lexical resource score.